Welcome everyone. Welcome to the 2020 CNU Florida Virtual Summit. I'm Artie White. I am the treasurer of CNU Florida and the regional representative for CNU Tallahassee. It's my great pleasure to welcome you and kick off this summit with everyone. I would really love to be meeting with everyone in person, but I am really excited about the opportunities that this virtual format will allow us. It's a little different, but I think we can use it to our advantage. I'd like to take a quick moment to thank our sponsors. And I have a slide with our sponsors. So I'd like to thank all of our sponsors. It's with your support that we're able to hold this summit and continue the good work of building places people love. I'm really excited to kick off the summit with none other than Lynn Richards, the president and CEO of CNU. Lynn is internationally recognized as a speaker and leader on new urbanism and has presented a range of topics, including economic development, highway removal and transformation, suburban retrofit, green infrastructure, and new urbanist trends. And with that, I would love to hand it over to you, Lynn.
Thanks, Rick. Thanks, Artie, and hi, Rick. And thanks everybody for inviting me here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to get started. There we go. So when Rick reached out to me, or I guess it was already reached out to me a couple of months ago, he asked me to talk about like trends and challenges, which I think would have been appropriate a year ago, but I don't think it's so appropriate now. So when I talked to Rick last week, I asked him if I could just talk about where I think our movement is, where I think cities are, and then how to move forward. And then he asked me, well, then can you talk a little bit about, you know, kind of news from national. So that's what we're going to be doing. I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes and then really open it up to Q&A. Last year, I was fortunate enough to be invited to speak to the CNU Florida chapter meeting, the statewide meeting. And it was really lovely. And I went through this conversation about kind of what is new urbanism, what are strategies that we can do, assuming that there were some people who were new in the audience to new urbanism and some that were, you know, old hands at it. But so forgive me if you're zooming in today and you're new to new urbanism, because I'm kind of picking up from a middle of the conversation as though I'm having a long conversation with my good buddy, you know, Rick and Victor, and saying, hey, this is where I think we are. I'm feeling a tremendous sense of urgency on the work that we have ahead of us. And that's what I want to convey to you today. So real briefly, the news from national is in March of this year, right before everything shut down, we released our new strategic plan. And I'm really excited about it. Usually we don't talk much about strategic plans, but you know, the board, we have an incredible national board, spent quite a bit of time drafting it. And this is words from the strategic plan is, we need to meet the extraordinary demand for places designed for access, connection, and resilience. We need systematic change so that the achievement of high quality, resilient urbanism can be shared equally, not just the province of a fortunate minority. That was written in January of this year. And so our idea, our strategic direction over the next several years, we're not putting an end date, is supporting complete neighborhoods, legalizing walkable places, and designing for a changing climate. We feel all three of those get to the outcome of resilient places. But more than just like, well, we're going to work on complete neighborhoods. Very specifically, in complete neighborhoods, we're going to support better collaboration and increase awareness to promote adoption of best practices. Absolutely, CNU has a message and a role to play in affordable housing and complete neighborhoods. But make no mistake, we cannot do it alone. And for so long, there has been a strong feeling within the movement that we can own this, we can do this, we can do that. And it's like, no, moving forward to achieve the outcome of complete neighborhoods, we absolutely need to partner with organizations. We need to learn from them, at the same time, teach them what we know. And that's how we're going to create this goal of complete neighborhoods, where people can live, work, shop, and play, and, you know, live, work, shop, play together, have school. How is that, all of this going to change? We're not entirely sure. Post-pandemic, we're not entirely sure, but we do know we have to do it collaboratively with partners from the community, partners with the housing groups, partners with the education groups, partners with the retail groups. Everything's going to change. And so that's really where our focus is going to be, on supporting complete neighborhoods, of working collaboratively across many groups. The second is legalizing walkable places. As CNU members, you know better than anybody that so much of what we are trying to do is illegal. The codes and ordinances don't allow it. Rick and I were talking last week about all of the barriers around street design. Specifically, we want to expand the project for code reform to address other essential regulatory barriers, such as green infrastructure and street design. We want to amplify these results, and we want to expand the knowledge base specifically around regulatory issues. If we think that our cities are in crisis now, what is the best way, what is one of the best ways that we can help cities, which is to remove these barriers? How can we enable and empower more people to work in communities to help bring our downtowns back, downtown and other areas? And then finally, designing for a changing climate. And there's two pieces of that. One is developing and advancing the design solutions for adapting the built environment. Now, a lot of CNU members have been working on this for years, but what I think is more important, and what I'm sensing an urgency around, is guiding cities and regions as they prepare for a climate responsive future. So what does that mean? The New York Times last week said that we are looking at, in the United States, close to 17 million climate migrants. Which would be the largest population migration within the United States ever, more so than the Civil War, more so than in the Dust Bowl during the Great Depression. So how can we work with some cities like Buffalo, Cleveland, Akron as welcoming cities, that they have amazing urbanism, amazing bones. They have plenty of fresh water. They have a lot of natural resources going for them. How can we work with them to prepare welcoming cities? And how can we work with those cities that are being hammered to begin to retreat a little bit? And the way we think about it is, if you're in Los Angeles and sea rise is coming, you know, how do you prepare, how do you prepare your city and the infrastructure within that city for kind of a planned retreat? People have been talking about climate change. CNU members have been talking about climate change, and that we need to engage on this issue for years, ever since I came in. And I'm from the EPA. I absolutely know that climate change is a huge issue. But it wasn't until we started talking about the very specific design solutions, and then working with cities around, you know, again, the welcoming cities, and how we can help with the long-term planning of that. These are issues that CNU has owned and has worked on for decades. And it's a way for us to add significant value to the conversation in a way that other organizations haven't, or you know, they're focusing on other aspects. And I think that is really essential. So again, our three focus areas will be supporting complete neighborhoods, legalizing walkable places, and then designing for a changing climate. All of that we're really excited about. So that's the kind of news from national on that aspect. The other kind of news from national is hopefully. So we've been working with the Senate Environmental Public Works Committee and several House members, both on the blue and red side, about a new program to fund highway removal. This is the inner loop from Rochester, New York, for those folks from upstate New York. I'm from Rochester. I learned how to drive on the inner loop because nobody was ever on it. And so this is the inner loop, which was filled in to reconnect these two neighborhoods. And this is affordable housing. And so the House bill, or the Senate EPW bill, is called Restoring Neighborhoods and Strengthening Communities Program. And the purpose of it is to establish a grant program to assist communities in identifying and improving or removing infrastructural barriers in the community that create an obstacle to the connectivity, while at the same time putting programs in place to unlock the benefits of removal for the current members of the community. There's going to be 3 different types of grants around highway removal: community engagement, education, and capacity building grants. So many of the campaign leaders with whom we work need help on the, they've reported out to us, they need help on the kind of feasibility studies, the building capacity. They've reported out that they need help with building the capacity, working collaboratively with local governments on a true community engagement process. The second area for grants will be planning and feasibility study grants. So when we're talking about the possibility of removing I-81 in Syracuse, New York, what about the average daily trips, the ADT? Where is that traffic going to go? What's the feasibility? Today, advocates and local governments have been at the mercy of state DOTs, some of which can be more enlightened than others. So this funding will provide grants for community members, local governments, and other partners to do their own feasibility studies. And then the third is the capital construction grants of actually removing the highway and rebuilding something else in its place. The something else in its place is going to be meeting mobility, broad mobility goals, not just ADT or ADT goals. So the EPW, the total price on this particular bill is about 350 billion, and they're talking approximately about 120 million for highway removal, which is mostly to demonstrate the need for highway removal, or the desire, as well as to get a half a dozen feasibility studies done. We've been working with the Senate on this, I want to say for almost 2 years, as well as some House members. Not sure where this is going to go. A lot of it is going to be wrapped up into the new transportation, bill, which is coming due next year. But it's politics, it's Washington. Your guess is as good as mine. But what's interesting about it, and particularly empowering, is that over the last several years, CNU is constantly being called into with members on the Hill on how to structure highway removal programs and grant programs. As I said, we must have had a half a dozen meetings. We must have had a slew of meetings with a half a dozen members, all kind of coalescing around the same idea. And I kind of find that exciting. And then again, news from Washington is CNU 29, which will be May 19th through 21, 3 days in 2021, will be virtual. I'm really sorry to announce this. Lori Volk and I are getting a message out to all members, friends, allies, partners sometime in this coming week. But we looked at the public health dynamic that was occurring globally, because our Congress is a global event. And we felt that we could do so much more with the Congress if we knew months in advance that we would be virtual, versus making the change just two months out, as we did last year. It was a very difficult decision to make, as I'm sure it was for all of you. But if it is going to be virtual, and we know this ahead of time, how can we break the box? How can we think creatively of having discussions? How can we leverage our weekly online webinar on the park bench as to do a series of what we might call sessions and then use the Congress for discussion. There are a lot of different ideas that we're batting around, such as, you know, let's have mobile tours of your favorite CNU neighborhood and have people ask questions. Oh, I want to see that building. Let's have that discussion. So I'm not saying that we're excited about planning it. I'm excited that we know what's going to be happening. And if in the event that the public health dynamic has changed considerably between now and next May, we will work collaboratively with the chapters to help them plan chapter in-person meetups, you know, viewing parties, you know, tours, something along those lines. Because we are going virtual again, we ended up bumping up CNU 30 to March of 2022. Again, as soon as the public health dynamic changes to where it's safe for large groups of people to gather in person, we will start a series of summits around complete neighborhoods, around equity and social justice, around climate justice. We are as hungry as you all to begin meeting in person again and to exchange ideas, because going into my last point, we have a lot of work ahead of us. There is a lot of work that needs to be done for dismantling the structural racism that is found in so many of our zoning codes and ordinances and city rules, looking at climate justice, looking at social justice. There are a lot of different names that we can call this, but at the end of the day, it's really about kind of pulling our cities back together again. I talked to Barry Alberts, who some of you may know is one of the co-chairs of CNU 27 in Louisville, and this is the Palace Theater where we were not so long ago, and it's boarded up, as is most of Louisville. And Barry, who's a lifelong urbanist and has built a lot of affordable housing and has been active in building Louisville back up, said to me on the phone, he's like, Lynn, it's going to take 10 years for Louisville to come back. It's just not going to be the end of the global health pandemic, but it's going to take a whole bunch of effort. And for those of you who think, yes, but we've done this before, we have brought cities back, we can do it again, I would challenge you, because what Barry and I talked about is this emerging new egalitarianism. In the past, people have come to CNU because we've been the quote unquote experts. They've come to learn. And when the experts have gotten together amongst themselves, it's to exchange ideas. I think at this juncture, we don't know what the answers are. If we are wanting to rebuild our cities, towns, and neighborhoods with a distinct social justice outcome, we need to drop some of our hubris, drop some of our expertness. As Rick and I were talking last week, I said, you know, we know what the outcome is. Our 2.5, 3 decades of work is that we know we need an active public realm. And where we trip ourselves up sometimes is that we'll tell communities how you get to an active public realm, but that's the outcome that we want. I would challenge that there's a new way that we need to work moving forward, knowing that we need an active public realm, working collaboratively with the community and being there as a resource so they can leverage our knowledge and our resources and identify for themselves how do they want to get to that outcome, or perhaps even suggest a different outcome of what they want. And that's going to require a new way of us working, of having open hearts and open minds. That's going to be a new way of how we speak. It's going to be a new way of how we go into a community, that we don't go in as the experts anymore, that we're kind of off to the side as resources to be tapped, you know, if needed. How can we put the community first? And if we're talking about, and what I like, I think it's my last slide, what I like so much about Louisville is, you know, the Portland neighborhood. I don't know how many of you saw it, but whose last name I'm totally forgetting. One of the co-chairs of CNU 27, Gil Holland, work to revitalize Portland, but he didn't work to revitalize Portland, right? He empowered the residents to imagine and to think about what and to envision what they wanted. And it was slow and it was arduous and it was done one house at a time. And so if we're talking about rebuilding our cities, how can we do it as partners? How can we own what we don't know? I don't think we have a choice any longer. For the last several years, the 6 years that I've been in this position, I have worked to ensure that there are spaces for everyone. That the CNU members who have been with us for 25 years and who have made the organization what it is, let's make sure that there's places for the longtime CNU members. Let's make sure that there's time and space for the new voices. But I think where we're coming out is kind of vanilla. Nobody's happy with it across the board. And I'm feeling a real sense of urgency with the Black Lives Movement uprisings that occurred, with the sense of the economy collapsing on so many people, that as new urbanists, we have so much to give to this conversation, but we need to change how we give it. We need to rethink how we give that. And that's where I think we are kind of moving forward. So I want to challenge you. You're about to go in for 5 days. 5 days is a long time, my friends. 5 days of sessions and thinking about where the CNU chapter is. And I want to challenge each and every one of you listening to this right now, as you're hearing somebody like myself, like Chuck Marone, like Andreas Duani, two brilliant folks, like Andrew Howard from Build a Better Burb. I want to challenge you. It's like, is this the best way to put the community first? How can we go in where we are seeing less as the experts, less as the top down, and more as a collaborator? How can we keep an open mind that maybe there are 8 million other ways or a dozen other ways to get to the outcomes of safe and complete streets, and just not the ways that we've been working? In other words, I'm challenging you all to join me in a quiet revolution where we, or perhaps it's not so quiet, where we strengthen CNU, we strengthen our outreach, we strengthen our membership, all in service to the community members, all in service to our downtowns, to our suburbs, to our small towns, to our rural areas, all in service to creating a more socially just, equal, equitable, and frankly welcoming United States and internationally too. The international piece I haven't quite figured out. So with that, more than happy to take any questions, discussion. And since I challenged you, you're more than welcome to say, yo, Richards, you are absolutely full of it. But I hope that we can have a broader conversation about what we can do, what we can't do, and where your thinking is. Because I think it's that kind of conversation that we need to have for the next chunk of years as we begin to work to rebuild these places, as we begin to move into what post-pandemic, post-2020 looks like. So with that, I'll open it up to Q&A. There are no questions.
There are no questions at the moment, but just for everyone's edification, there is a question and answer box. There's also a chat. And if you raise your hand in Zoom, I can try to unmute you and allow you to ask your question live. So a couple different ways, but you were just given a strong challenge, and these are interesting times. So we're happy to coordinate so Lynn can try to give a response.
Artie, this is Rick. I will start off this Q&A session, if I may. Lynn, what a challenge. What a great challenge. You're challenging us to go beyond the simplistic and the rather direct challenge we faced in the last part of the 20th century, was to overcome the ubiquitous auto-dominant landscape that we had created as a nation. and you know, getting the auto dominance cracked open and allow more for urbanism and walkability was the main challenge. And so a lot of our energy was poured into that, and we've made a lot of progress. We haven't completely solved it, obviously, just looking around in many cities, but we have a lot of answers and a lot of other partners like the ASHTO group moving toward walkability. The ASHTO Green Book now has 5 context classifications, and they're going to set up design parameters for that. But what you're asking us to do is to as Dwayne Carver, a friend of mine, said once, when you walk into a CNU meeting now, check your guns at the door and come on in and be cooperative, be a great listener. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it is. And I'm as guilty as the next person. I only wanted to interrupt you 6 times, Rick, and I'm really practicing sitting and listening. And I'm so grateful that you mentioned the work that we had to do at the last part of the end of the 20th century and the first part of the 21st century, because you are right. That we haven't left that behind. There are still so many places that are being designed with the auto as kind of a central feature, but I would challenge us on this in that the solutions that we geared, did they really help serve everyone, right? And so I have often said, and I'm going to get in trouble with the APA friends, but I have often said that I have the best job in the world because I work with the best and the brightest. And I'm not saying that members of APA aren't, but you know, as Artie said, he's a member of the APA. But I mean, come on, that's what CNU members all the time. They get together and they just chat and they come up with 8 million solutions, right? I mean, the innovators, the thinkers, the holistic aspect of it. And all I'm saying is that let's take that now and bust open our doors, like blow them open and have that same type of collaborative conversation with community members and to put community first. We still have all of those challenges to solve, and then even more so, but we've got to do it in a different way. And a great example of what I mean is the charrette. Like charrette, it's a foundational idea for new urbanism. And the basis of a charrette is that people come to our table. It's a wide open table and people come to our table, right? But can we turn that a little bit on its side and to say, how would the charrette process be different? And I don't know, how would the charrette process be different if we put a community member in charge of the entire thing and we went to other people's table and we didn't start with what we knew, but we started by listening? You know, because of constraints around time and resources, and we're flying everywhere, a lot of the charrettes that I've been in, you know, you kind of start with like, here's some initial ideas, give us feedback. And it's like, instead of that, let's start, you know, 6 months prior. And so many CNU members already do this, but I'm just saying we need to do more of it. We need to rethink that we're not going in, you know, a white planner, I don't believe anymore, can go into a Black or brown community and lead the process. We can be there as a resource, but we need to expand the leadership pipeline of who's in our movement. We need to put community members first, and we need to kind of really be there. And I'm going to answer a question that just came in on this, which is, how do we balance really listening with keeping with our core mission? CNU recently tightened up our mission, that CNU's mission is to champion walkable urbanism. And I think we just keep pivoting to that. That's what I meant by that. That's the outcome. Like, we're championing walkable urbanism. So if we're talking in a community group and the community wants to, like, well, let's build this parking lot and that parking lot, it's like, you could do that, right? And it'll lead to this outcome. Let's think about it a little bit differently. And one way that Mitch Silver, who's the New York City Parks Commissioner, talks about creating open and inclusive parks, I never thought about this before, is having great basketball courts. You know, when a Black person walks into a park, if it doesn't have a basketball court, is thinking, again, this is what Mitch is saying, not me. You know, I don't feel I belong here. And so he went through to really strengthen and build these fantastic basketball courts. And it was, and that's very simplistic. He did a lot more than that. But it's the idea of, we know what outcome we want. There are a lot of different ways to get to that outcome. So Rick, you were talking about 5 design classifications, and maybe that's a great success in working with the Florida DOT. I don't want to diminish that work at all, but let's think forward 20 years from now. What will those 5 classifications yield in terms of social justice? Will it yield the outcomes that we're looking for? It may very well yield the outcomes that we're looking for a walkable community. But if we're just strengthening this segregation paradigm, is that really getting to where we need to go? And make no mistake, I feel, again, this is like a quiet revolution. We're either going to be on the outside or the inside. And I feel so strongly that every person that I'm talking to now has something to contribute to help move this conversation forward. There's not a single CNU member that I've met that doesn't have brilliance to add to this conversation. We just have to package it and hold ourselves differently. So,
yeah, Lynn, excellent response. Of those context areas, we're hoping that they add 1 more and do 6. 1 through 3 would be rural to suburban, and then 4, 5, and 6 can all be walkable urban. And once you understand what those mean, then your basketball courts could be much more effectively placed in 4, 5, and 6, the urban walkable, than in suburban 3, where you have to drive 2 miles to get to the first basketball court.
Or we create walkable suburban areas, but yes.
Well, but they in the past have done walkable drive to sports complexes with intense lighting and everything that are not neighborhood oriented at all. But yeah, I'd encourage everybody to tune in tomorrow evening around 5 or 6 when we'll have a discussion about John Nolan's history by Bruce Stevenson. And he's going to address this, this racism that has existed in the past, and even John Nolan's experience with racism in Florida in the 30s, in the 20s. So that's just a little ad for tomorrow evening. But yeah, so great concepts.
Liz PZ here, Liz Plater-Zyberg, again, she's so thoughtful and graceful, says, might there be a useful difference between experts and expertise? Yes, Liz, that's, I think, the nail on the head. Perhaps it's impossible to wind it back so that we're no longer experts, but that we're providing expertise. That's mine. Perhaps the problem is that our expertise has become dogma. I think Liz has hit it right. We have gone to school, we have certifications, we have decades of experience of how to achieve XYZ outcome. That is, that I think is incredibly useful as experience and expertise, but that isn't necessarily now the best way to move forward. And maybe it is, but again, going into so many different charrettes that I've participated in, it's we know best. And I want to just like shake it up, and how can we put the community in control of what knows best. We're having various conversations about partnerships with different groups on coding, and they want to just like throw out the rule book and start over. And I think that there's some really interesting work in that, and we have to do within our own team quite a bit of work and conversations that we're having to get ready for this series of meetings, where we don't say, no, it can't be done. You know, there's public safety reasons why we do it that way. It's like, okay, so instead of saying it can't be done, to say, one of the reasons why it's been done this way is public safety. How might you suggest we meet those same public safety outcomes. So I think Liz has it right, that it's not that the experts are evil. I don't even want to use the word evil, but that we are better positioned as a type of experience and expertise in this. So Max.
We actually have Liz live if she has anything else that she wanted to ask as part of that question.
Oh, sorry.
Are you there, Liz?
Well, the bad news is that it's actually Andres who sent that in.
Ah.
Oh, well, geez.
So anyway,
You do so good, Mag.
but listen, I, if anything, I think that your proposition is not radical enough. And what you said at the end, which is the code should be thrown out and rethought, there's an awful lot of, in that sense, we have to be able to study failure. You know, in a really open way. Well, that didn't work. Well, that kind of charrette didn't work. That code is too complicated. Mm-hmm. And that kind of very open discussion has been considered impolite. And we should have much more of a free for all in terms of what doesn't work, you know, and then we go on from there.
I think that's right. I think that's right, my friend, that I think there are ways to have that where we're not mean. And I'm not saying that you ever have that. I'm thinking more about myself. But there are ways of having it where we're talking about the outcomes of X, Y, Z and how that impacted and how it led to, you know,
Lynn, one more thing about this is
yes,
part
sir.
of the problem of much of what we do is that it's too expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We only move with the full army. We move with the full code. We move with all the renderers and all the engineers, etc. And however much you want to help the small groups, you know, the little platoons, you know, of the neighborhoods, we're just too expensive. And there's something, we need to address that also. How can we lighten up to really be of service to people who really can't pay the pre-pandemic fees, you know, or the pre-2008 fees?
Well, and here's the thing, as I'm preparing a bunch of grants with new partners and 50% of the grant goes to the new partner, not only are things more expensive, but we are now working to lift up our partners in a way that we haven't before. You know, as a small nonprofit where every penny counts, it's like, nope, if we're working with this folks to be true partners, to be true equals, that means that, you know, that we're paid the same. So in some ways it's going to be perhaps more expensive for the local government. So Andreas, this question of yours, I think has multiple layers, and I think that you're right. And I'm so glad to hear you that I'm not being radical enough, because the next time I speak on it, I will go further. You know, I took the summer off. I had to take care of my mom, and I came back just like I'm done being.
Oh, so you missed the revolution? Well, let me tell you.
I didn't miss the revolution. I was listening to it, but it's just like, you know, we have been trying, and you've yelled at me so much. Again, we're having a conversation amongst friends, right? That was the ground rules for this conversation. You've said to me so many times, you know, Lynn, you're trying to make everybody happy, and you just can't do it. And you know what? You're right. I'm tired. I'm done with it. Trying to make everybody happy. There is, we as an organization and as a movement, we can no longer be on the sidelines on this. We can no longer be quiet as cities, you know, create this very complex set of codes and ordinances where it takes, you know, 4 lawyers to figure out how to build a Foursquare. I think we need to be loud and forceful, and innovative. Anyway, so.
Lynn, just one more thing. That last slide of yours with the graffiti on the blank wall.
Yeah.
That was full. That is not one of our legal frontages, as you know. Okay. You know, that's not in the repertoire of 8 final frontages for civilization. That's totally different. And one of the things, I don't think we have to discard everything, but we really have to add repertoire.
Yeah.
Like that wall is really comfortable. And neoclassical porch is not comfortable for people. And so we have not, in our elitism, particularly architectural elitism, we have not made anybody below the middle class comfortable. It's always uncomfortable, you know? And so I think to expand into something more closer to that slide of yours, that last slide, that should be a challenge.
Yeah. No, I think this is a conversation that we all should be having. And I encourage folks who are listening, as the different speakers come up, if you're not challenging them and their assumptions of how do we work collaboratively and as equals with community members, how do we make it cheaper to get to the outcomes? How can we leverage our expertise and not come in as experts? I think we need to be questioning this in all of our work. And so Brzezinski asks, you know, what can I be doing and to helping? And I think it's just questioning our own biases and questioning our own assumptions. And two, Brzezinski, we have a small little job that we want you to volunteer on to help with this. I just haven't gotten around to sending the email. Anywho, so Andreas, I don't mean to cut you off, but there's
No, I don't feel cut off.
Okay, great. So Max, can you expand on the highway removal program that you mentioned? CNU is collaborating with lawyers on. What kind of projects will be prioritized? Is there talk about a racial justice aspect to restoring neighborhoods that were cleared for highway construction? So, okay. So number one, it's legislation. And so legislation is purposefully broad, and the most you can kind of do is put in like some metrics and some outcomes, and it'll be the responsibility of the implementing agency, which I think in this case will be DOT, to determine, you know, the broader aspects of how it will be implemented. So this is, as I said, about a $350 billion grant program. $200 billion of it is coming from the CARES Act that wasn't spent. I don't fully understand that aspect of it. And right now there are about 30 active campaigns for highway removal. And so those campaigns are at various stages of completeness. Some, such as Skyway in Buffalo, and the I-81 is moving into past feasibility into what are the designs to put in after it comes in. Some are much more at the initial stages. So the idea of what projects will be prioritized, it's really going to come down to the grant applications that come in, and there's three buckets, you know, looking at the capacity building and forming the partnerships and the technical assistance. The second bucket will be around technical feasibility studies, and the third bucket will be capital projects. And the criteria that is in there as lightly as possible is around social equity, partnerships, the strength of the partnerships to make sure that the community that has been bifurcated is a strong partner in this, as well as other NGOs. So this is creating a seat for CNU members and chapters to be at the table. And I don't know about radical justice or racial justice. There is a lot of that within the act. I can get back to Artie on what has been made public, because I'm pretty sure it's on the Thomas Jefferson system, which is where all the draft bills are. So we were mostly trying to get to, in addition to the racial justice aspect of it, and that's, you know, upfront when you're talking about it. But what we don't want to have happen is a highway come down and a 6-lane arterial get built in its place, which has happened in a couple of places. So we're really trying to get to mobility and look at place. And that's again where the feasibility studies come in. What are you going to do with the traffic? Where's it going to go? State DOTs just don't understand that 25% of the traffic just disappears. And, you know, no engineer, but what do you mean it just disappears? So I was like, well, we don't know either. It just always disappears. Across every single time you've done this, it just disappears. Well, I don't believe that. So,
Lynn, can you say what the I-10 New Orleans situation is now, or is it dormant? Are they
the Claiborne
active?
Is this the Claiborne Expressway?
Yep.
Ben Crothard, who is the staff person leading this, could tell you off the top of my head, it is not dormant. Amy Stelly came, who is the kind of leading that effort, came to our transportation summit last fall, and she brought with her 10 community members. We had funding from the Ford Foundation to cover quite a bit of their travel. So we're in the process now of launching call for nominations of the 10 worst freeways, you know, our Freeways Without Futures report, which will be released early next year. We think Amy's getting ready to put in an application on that. I don't know where the status of that is. I do know that the advocates very much want it to come down. You know, I don't know what the holdup is. Like even with I-81 in Syracuse, right, where the governor and everybody has said it needs to come down, and there's an outer loop where you can direct, you know, the freight traffic, and like even that, which is a no-brainer because the city and the state either has to invest, you know, about $150 million to rebuild it or to take it down and build place at a fraction of the cost. Even that is stalled because what DOT suggested with Syracuse is putting in, you know, a 10-lane arterial through the center. It's like, that's not going to get to the placemaking and the economic bounce, nor is it going to really bring back these communities. So
one of the obstacles is Port of New Orleans with containers coming in from the ships. And they say they rely on I-10 very heavily, but
freight's a huge issue, you know,
alternatives,
enormous issue. Yeah. And as city builders, we cannot be, we have to acknowledge the freight movement and to ensure that there are alternatives for freight. Okay, so Brett Jones, as an outsider to and a fan of CNU that has been aware of it for over 20 years, in part because of Celebration Florida, it may be important for the CNU insiders to know that they have been effective in teaching enough of us non-experts about CNU. We buy in. I'm elated to hear Lynn talk about the experts listening to the entrepreneurs and other leaders, and to be allowed to be experts and let the entrepreneurs take the lead, and CNU experts give the expertise whenever it's needed to focus the principles on the big ideas. It took a generation of CNU leadership, and I think it's becoming mainstream. Yes, I think I think that is what I'm proposing. I think it's going to come easier to some people than to others. But the thing that unites us all is the charter. See, it's right there. I keep it in my home office, and unlike any other organization that's working in the movement, we are bound, you know, whether we're red or blue, whether we're engineers or homeless advocates, we are bound by the charter. And I feel that is an incredible strength, that it dictates a set of values, of social values, of how we see development and community being built at the block, neighborhood, town, city, and regional scale. And I feel that is our strength, and that is what is going to enable us to meet this challenge and to go further. As Andrea said, we need to be more bold. Okay, Artie just reminded me I have 7 minutes left. Anonymous, what are the best ways to engage and to collaborate with the community in order to make planning decisions in the age of social distancing? Well, yes, that is problematic. I am assuming the assumption that I'm making as we move forward is that this social distancing is a shorter period of time, and that the quiet revolution that I'm talking about is a longer period of time, that we all will be meeting in person again, that we all will be working in communities again. And I find it essential that when we go in and we're back working, that we do so collaboratively and as equals. That being said, I also know that a number of cities and CNU members are being very effective with virtual engagement. And I think even the same kind of principles start, if we're doing any kind of engagement in a Black or Brown community, to make sure that the leadership of our team looks like the folks that we're working with. which we traditionally have been really bad at. A lot can be done over Zoom, but if I were to zoom in to West Side in Atlanta, I don't look like West Side in Atlanta, right? So how can we, again, partner where I'm like off over here, you know, the side of the room, and somebody else who is just as strong technically. And I feel that as members, each and every one of us can do a lot to identify someone and to lift them up, to identify a black or brown community planner, advocate, transportation planner, engineer. You know, it's not okay. I've often said it's not okay to have all male panels. And I'm thinking, you know, moving forward, we need to not just to have a token person, but to have an incredibly strong team across the board. And the only way we as a movement are going to achieve that is if every single person takes that personally to begin to lift up those planners, those architects, those urban designers that may have been overlooked. Every time I speak with, not every time, but Ashley Walton, who's an incredibly talented architect and urban designer at UDA in Pittsburgh, UDA, yeah, I got that right, Urban Design Associates, often says that she was like the 375th registered woman architect, you know, Black woman architect in the country. And I'm like, what, how is that possible? I love the work that Diru's doing and mentoring students, and Ellen Dunham Jones. And I think that that's something all of us can do, because that's how we're going to get to this collaboration. That's how we're going to create teams that are representative of the places in which we're working. Daniel Marsh, is tactical urbanism, ED, a 7-day makeover prototyping, a way to get the cost of design down? So Daniel, Andrew Howard would tell you of Build a Better Block. What he told me is that it's not 7 days. It's actually working months ahead of time in the community and doing that collaborative work that we talked about. The actual makeover may be a shorter period of time and you engage more of the community, kids and kids, parents, grandparents coming out. But I do think that the team Build a Better Block is talking during your summit, and I would listen and I would challenge them, because I think that in my understanding, tactical urbanism is a fantastic way to prove the concept, but I don't think it necessarily drives costs down. Anywho, Austin has we have 2 questions left. Artie, let me know if I can answer these 2. Austin has an influx of homeless camps on highways due to its mayor's policies. LA has a growing lower class that lack a place to live. How can CNU help shape communities for these people? Is there a way to combine new urbanism with lower income housing in order to create successful communities of the lower economic class? I wish I had asked that earlier. So the answer to that is yes. I'd love to point out the work that John Anderson is doing in the Incremental Development Alliance. It's about empowering a developer, empowering a person to become a developer to restore one house. And maybe it's a 4 square, maybe it's a 3 flat, maybe it's a duplex, you live in one half and you redo the other. It's allowing accessory dwelling units. It's frankly getting rid of single family zoning. I live in a neighborhood that has single family zoning and these huge McMansions are going up. Why not create a huge McMansion but have 4 apartments in it? You know, the form of the building still meets the street, it still contributes to the urbanism. It's just how it's being used on the inside. There are a lot of different ways that we can use new urbanist practices and approaches to create more affordable housing. And then Randy asks, and I'm not sure I understand this question, Black Lives Matters want segregation. Why give in to the movement? So Randy, I'm not entirely sure I agree with that. But I'm just going to park that for a moment and to say what I took out of everything that I read and experienced over this summer particularly as it pertained to the planning field, is that over the last 20 or 40 years, we have been unintentional participants in building this structural racism. You know, my mom lived in Honolulu Falls, New York, with a minimum 5-acre zoning, right? That served, you know, one outcome. It was intended to preserve the farmland, but you don't preserve farmland with 5-acre zoning. It was really an exclusionary zoning practice. And I don't think that we've been loud enough in talking about what are the outcomes around this. There have been, again, we've been unintentional, or perhaps intentional for some folks, you know, contributors to this. And so I feel that we need to be intentional contributors to the undoing. Now, if a city still wants to, you know, build an exclusionary development, you know, that's on them. At least then they're being intentional about it. And I'm not going to comment on that one way or the other, but I just know that actions that we have done have led to these unintentional consequences, or at least on our part. So how can we own that and then work to turn that around? So with that, it has been an incredible pleasure to kick off the CNU Florida Summit. Really appreciated the small little conversation that I have with Andreas, and keep my challenge there as you go on the next 5 days. Keep challenging, pushing people, and you know, feel free to reach out with me and say, yo, Richards, you forgot about this, or what about this? Because this is a dialogue I feel that we need to have as a movement. And since we can't get together in some place this spring, we need to have it virtually. So let's keep having it. And I know with you all, you know, the members, the partners, the friends of CNU, it's gonna be great. I know we can make an impact. I know we can do this. I believe in you. I believe in us. So thank you all.
Thank you, Lynn. I greatly appreciate that. And I love that you started off the CNU Florida Summit with quite a strong challenge. Even if it didn't go quite far enough, not quite radical enough for some, I appreciate that you started off that way. I want to remind all the panelists that our next session is the Strong Towns with Chuck Maron, and we'll be having a social hour with Better Block after that. So stay with us and look forward to seeing you there. Thanks, everyone.